She handed me a glass of orange juice and said, "Here's to success, sweetheart." She had never called me that before. I smiled, but I felt it, deep in my gut, that something was off. It wasn't the drink. It was her eyes. They didn't smile with her lips. They watched me, like she was waiting for something. I paused, not enough to make her suspicious, just long enough to hear the silence between us grow louder. Then I picked up her glass instead and handed her mine. 30 minutes later, she was on the bathroom floor vomiting, barely coherent. She told the paramedics she had food poisoning, but I knew. I'd felt it in my bones long before that moment. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a bad night. This was an execution gone wrong. And the woman I built my life around, she wanted me dead. That was the moment I stopped being afraid and started collecting proof. Not just for me, for my son, for the truth, for the reckoning.
Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. She handed me a glass of orange juice and said, "Here's to success, sweetheart." She had never called me that before, not once in nearly 10 years of marriage. I smiled, but my gut clenched. It wasn't the words, it was the tone. Her voice was too soft, her eyes too still. The corners of her lips turned up, but her expression was hollow, rehearsed. The kind of look people wear when they're watching something die and pretending to mourn it. I didn't sip the juice. I watched her take a light sip from her glass. Mine, actually. I had switched them the moment she turned her back to grab a napkin. It was subtle, smooth. I'd practiced that motion in my head for weeks. 30 minutes later, she was on the bathroom floor, vomiting. She blamed shellfish. The doctor called it food poisoning. I called it proof. See, this wasn't the first time I'd felt something was wrong. It was just the first time I acted on it. For months, I'd been living in a house where every smile felt forced and every touch made me want to recoil. My name is Jackson Ryder. I'm a systems strategist for one of the most powerful private financial firms in Manhattan. I built my life on logic, precision, control. But love was my one blind spot. And Delana, my wife, used that blind spot like a blade. She wasn't always like this. Or maybe she was, and I didn't want to see it. When we first met, she was magnetic, a luxury art advisor dripping in grace, calm, and mystery. Her taste was impeccable, her wit disarming. She knew how to command a room without saying a word. We built everything together. The Tribeca condo, the summer house in Montauk, the reputation, the social circle. We even had our son Cale planned down to the month. On paper, we were the ideal power couple, but the truth was, I was the architect, and she was the illusion. Somewhere between gallery openings and charity galas, she stopped being my partner. I could feel it, like static in the air before a storm. Her gaze would linger too long on her phone. Her excuses for late returns became thinner, more rehearsed. Her desire to control the smallest details of our home, schedules, staff, tech, grew obsessive. But the moment that truly changed everything happened 2 months before the orange juice. I had returned early from a client meeting in Connecticut. I didn't announce it. I never do. I walked through the smart lock door, and the first thing I heard was silence. Too much silence. No music, no staff. The usual rhythm of our household was missing. Then I heard water running upstairs, the master bathroom. I moved quietly. Years in data operations had trained me in that. how to hear what wasn't being said. And in that moment, the silence screamed louder than any argument. I opened the door just an inch. Steam. Two silhouettes. Hers and someone else's. A man. Not panicked. Not rushed. Intimate. Familiar. His back was to me, his hand moving slowly across her waist like he belonged there. I closed the door without a sound. That was the day I knew. She wasn't just cheating. She was comfortable doing it in our home, in our bed. That meant it wasn't a fling. It was a strategy. And from then on, I made one decision. I would never confront her in anger. I would never give her the satisfaction of a breakdown. I would watch. I would listen. And when the time came, I would dismantle her world with the same precision I built mine. I installed independent backups on the smart home network. I hired a specialist to clone her phone and route every private message to a hidden server. I bought a second phone and gave it only to one person. Arden. Arden and I used to be business partners. We had history, tense, sharp, layered. But she was the only person I trusted with this. She was ruthless, brilliant, and owed me one. When I called her, she didn't ask why. She just said, "What's the play?" Delana made it easy. Her carelessness was her weakness. The man from the bathroom. His name was Riven Kai. A mid-level architect with a flair for boutique hotel design. Charismatic, flashy, broke. He wasn't just sleeping with my wife, he was conspiring with her. That orange juice? The chemical traces didn't lie. It wasn't enough to kill me, but it would have landed me in the hospital for a long time. With the right dosage and the right narrative, Delana crying in front of cameras about how I'd collapsed from overwork or a sudden condition, it would have been believable. A clean reset, a quiet exit, a grieving widow, and no prenup dispute. But she didn't count on one thing. I was already watching her. I started recording everything. Her calls, her texts, the whispered conversations with Riven in our study when she thought I was asleep, the late-night planning sessions, the planted arguments to bait me into lashing out. She wanted me to become the villain in my own story. And for a while, I almost did. But I remembered Cale. I remembered the little boy who watched everything, who felt the tension no matter how well I masked it. I remembered that my real legacy wasn't in buildings or wealth, it was in how I protected him. So when she handed me that drink, I didn't flinch. I smiled back. I toasted. And when she collapsed 30 minutes later, clutching the sink, pale and shaking, I watched. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I needed confirmation. Confirmation that I was right. That night, as she lay in bed recovering from what she called bad shrimp, I sat in the den and reviewed the surveillance footage. She had tampered with the home sensors, disarmed the kitchen cam, but not the one under the bar shelf. I saw her pour from a vial, stir, wait, smirk. It was done. This was the beginning, not of a fight, but of a chess game. And I don't lose games, I understand. There's a particular silence that comes after betrayal, the kind that lingers in the walls, settles in the corners, and whispers through the vents like it's watching you. That's what my home became. Not a place of rest, but a crime scene waiting for evidence to surface. The morning after the orange juice incident, Delana moved like nothing happened. She wore a silk robe, brushed her hair into a soft wave, and poured herself espresso from the kitchen machine as if she hadn't been clutching the bathroom sink hours earlier, her body rejecting what she thought she'd fed to me. "You want eggs? Or should I have Simone prep something for your meeting?" she asked, her voice light, even motherly. Her tone was the same one she used with Cale when he scraped his knee, a soft, practiced concern that didn't quite reach the eyes. "Just coffee," I said. We stood in the kitchen, sunlight filtering in through the double-height windows, casting long geometric shadows on the polished stone floor. I watched her as she turned to the sink, as casual as any other day, and I realized something chilling. She had already convinced herself she got away with it. That moment wasn't a victory. It was a turning point, because now I knew I wasn't imagining any of it. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a midlife marriage slump. My wife had tried to take me out of the picture, and still she made my coffee. I took the cup but didn't drink it. I thanked her, kissed her temple gently, and walked back toward the study where my second phone, my real one, was charging behind the wall-mounted bookshelf. That's where Arden waited on the other end of a secure line. She didn't ask me how I slept. "She's still using Signal and the fake Pinterest boards," Arden said. "Looks like they were planning something more elaborate, but then he backed off." "He?" "Riven. Of course." "Backed off?" I asked. "Yeah. Text thread 2 nights ago. He said something about it being too soon and not wanting to rush the estate stuff. She told him to trust her, that you'd crack on your own soon." I sat back, listening. It felt surreal, like I was studying someone else's life. But this was my kitchen, my house, my wife, my betrayal. I asked Arden to forward everything to the drive we shared under a dummy startup project name. We'd created an entire shell company just to store surveillance and digital evidence. I'd bought a domain, paid taxes, built a virtual data room. If Delana or anyone tried to snoop, it would look like a blockchain project in beta testing. "You're not going to expose her yet, are you?" Arden asked. "Not yet. Let her feel safe. The most dangerous enemy is the one who thinks they're winning." She laughed. "You always were poetic under pressure." But there was nothing poetic about the days that followed. Delana became performative. She started wearing softer tones, started talking more about us, about our future. She suggested we start traveling again, maybe a weekend in Aspen, just the two of us. I smiled, nodded, agreed. Then I added new cameras in the guest room, not because I suspected she was cheating there, but because that's where she stored the burner phone. I'd seen her use it after showering, the condensation still clinging to her skin as she typed. She thought she was untouchable. That's what arrogance does. It makes people lazy. One night, after she fell asleep, I retrieved the phone. I wore gloves. I worked quickly, cloned the contents and left it exactly where she left it, under a floorboard beneath the ottoman. The messages were worse than I expected. "He's losing focus, starting to look over his shoulder. Don't worry, I'll soften him up again, let him think I want to try. We need to time it with the gala. The media attention will give us cover." The gala. Of course. Every April, Delana curated a high-profile event for the Arts Reclamation Initiative, held at the rooftop pavilion of the Atria, one of Manhattan's most exclusive venues. It was an elite crowd, billionaires, board members, tech unicorns. That night was her playground. But this time, she wasn't planning art displays. She was planning a eulogy. I sent everything to Arden. "We'll need more than texts," she said. "We need footage, audio. A confession if we can get it." "I have a plan," I told her. The following week, I upgraded the sound system in the house. Delana thought I was just indulging a tech impulse. She didn't ask questions. She loved how the interface lit up across the central tablet. But what she didn't know was that the audio array doubled as a high-fidelity microphone system. Everything she said within range of the master bedroom, kitchen, and wine bar was now stored and automatically transcribed to the drive. And then one night, it happened. Cale was sleeping at my sister's place in Soho. Delana thought I was upstairs working. But she wasn't alone. Riven was there. In our home. I didn't watch from the hallway. I watched from the basement, on a secured feed routed through an external network hub that looked like a heat monitoring server. They drank, laughed, whispered, and then Delana said, It would have been easier if he had just taken the juice that morning. He hesitated. Switched glasses. I don't know how he knew. Riven looked at her and laughed. And you still stayed? Still sleeping beside him? He's dull, Riven. He thinks silence is power, but he doesn't know how to be ruthless. She poured another drink. Once the gala hits, and once the estate details are finalized, he'll be irrelevant. I'll handle Kale. Judges love a polished mother. That was it. That was the moment she stopped being my wife in my mind. That was the moment I stopped planning and started executing. Over the next week, I played the long game. I re-engaged with our private banker and subtly removed her co-signing authority from several family trusts, quietly moved key investments into alternate holding accounts under my name. No flags raised, no alerts triggered, but every move narrowed her access. I began prepping the gala with her as usual, smiled at her ideas, nodded at her plans. But in the background, Arden and I coordinated with 2 discreet investigators and a legal consultant specializing in digital evidence admissibility. Every move had to be precise, because I didn't just want her secrets, I wanted her confidence. I wanted her to walk into that gala thinking she had won. 2 nights before the event, Delana stood in the walk-in closet, deciding between 2 dresses. She turned to me, holding up one, red or black. I looked at her, at the dress, at the woman I used to love, and the stranger standing in her place. Red, I said. You'll be unforgettable. She smiled. That's the idea. I stepped outside that night and called Arden. Everything's in place, I said. Are you ready for what comes after? I thought about Kale, about what kind of man I needed to be to protect him, not just physically, but emotionally. I don't care about revenge, I said. I care about the truth. And making sure she never gets close to our son again. Arden's voice softened. Then you're already winning. The day of the gala arrived with deceptive calm. Skies over Manhattan were clean and cloudless, the streets humming with that muted opulence that only April in the city could offer. Drivers idled outside boutique hotels. Personal stylists walked garment bags through revolving doors. Somewhere uptown, a billion-dollar deal was being toasted over oysters. And downtown, in the penthouse of our Tribeca residence, my wife was getting ready to wear the mask she thought could still protect her. Delana stood at her vanity, hair pinned with surgical precision, skin glowing under the gold-tinted lights, the red gown cascading over her curves like silk poured from a crystal decanter. She looked stunning, flawless, deadly. You always knew how to make an entrance, I said, adjusting my cufflinks in the mirror. She caught my reflection in the glass. You're not nervous about tonight, are you? Should I be? She smirked. You're always so composed. Sometimes I wonder if you'd even flinch if a bomb went off in the room. I met her eyes through the mirror. Depends on who was holding the detonator. Her smirk faded just for a second, but she recovered quickly, placing a hand on my shoulder. Let's make tonight count. Big donors, big coverage. It's our moment. Our moment. She still thought she owned half this narrative. That night wasn't just about exposure. It was the beginning of the collapse. Hers, not mine. The rooftop of the atria was lit like a museum gala, all ambient amber lighting and sharp, echoing laughter. Guests arrived in tailored gowns, velvet jackets, watches worth small fortunes. Champagne flowed. Live string quartet hummed in the background. Media crews rotated through pre-cleared interview areas. Delana was the queen of the scene, as always. She greeted every billionaire like an old friend, smiled for the cameras, threw her head back when she laughed just enough to show sincerity without cracking her makeup. I stayed at her side for the first hour, playing the dutiful husband, polished, silent, supportive. Then I slipped away. Not abruptly, just smoothly enough that no one would think anything was off. I made rounds, shook hands, laughed at inside jokes from old donors. But every 5 minutes, I checked my phone, not for messages, but for the feed. Back at our home, Arden was monitoring the backup systems, verifying the footage, preparing the chain of custody documentation. Meanwhile, two legal experts were seated in the gala crowd, under fake names, sipping champagne and nodding politely. They weren't here to celebrate, they were witnesses. The plan wasn't to expose her in front of flashing cameras. The plan was to lock down everything the moment the show ended. But before the performance, I needed to play my final hand, quietly, directly, and with enough pressure to make her show her real face. I found her near the champagne bar, speaking to Riven. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not officially. He was a nobody in this circle. But there he was, leaning against a marble column like he belonged, wearing a designer tux he hadn't earned, and a smugness that curled around him like cologne. I watched as Delana leaned in and whispered something to him. He smiled, eyes flicking across the room, scanning for me. That's when I approached. Riven straightened a bit when he saw me. Delana, to her credit, didn't flinch. "Evening," I said casually, sipping from my glass. Didn't realize we'd be graced with architectural royalty tonight. Delana smoothed a hand down her gown. "Riven's helping consult on the new exhibit layout next quarter. You know how valuable his spatial work is." "Of course," I nodded. "Always a pleasure to be surrounded by visionaries." Riven opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "Funny how small Manhattan feels, doesn't it?" I said. "One minute you're strangers, next minute you're practically living out of each other's pockets." Delana blinked. I held her gaze just long enough for the subtext to hit. Then I smiled and raised my glass. To new beginnings. And walked away. Later that night, as the final speech wrapped and applause filled the rooftop, Delana stood at the podium, radiant and glowing, delivering her closing words. "We gather here not just to honor art, but to protect it. Because art, like truth, deserves guardians." Her voice trembled ever so slightly. I watched from the side of the stage, and for a moment I saw the cracks forming, not in her appearance, but in her timing. She was faltering. She knew something was off, because she had underestimated me. At 11:07 p.m., the guests began to depart. By 11:18, Delana was in the back of our car, silent, scrolling through her phone. I sat beside her. We didn't speak. When we arrived home, Kale was already asleep. Delana kicked off her heels and went straight to the kitchen, pouring herself a nightcap. I stayed back in the foyer, watching. She leaned on the counter and looked at me. "Something's changed," she said softly. "What do you mean?" You're different lately." "More aware," I said. "Less trusting. Smarter." She narrowed her eyes. "What do you know?" "Everything." She froze. And for the first time since this began, I saw panic. Not rage, not strategy. Fear. I walked toward her slowly, not threateningly, just with finality. "I know about the texts, the plans, the juice, the burner phones, the camera you thought you disabled in the kitchen." She blinked fast, her breath catching. "You're bluffing." I placed a flash drive on the counter. "I've already made copies. This goes to my attorney in the morning, and child custody begins next week." She didn't touch it. She just stared at me, eyes wide, red lips parting slightly, a tremble in her hand now visible. "You can't prove anything in court." "I don't need to prove it to a jury," I said. "I only need the right judge. And the right context. Emotional instability. Custody instability. Intent to harm. It's all in there. You forgot who you married, Delana." She backed away, voice shaking. You wouldn't destroy me. That's not who you are. I nodded. You're right. I'm not out for destruction. I'm out for protection. Of my son. Of my name. And of everything you thought you could erase. At 2:03 a.m., she left the house in silence. No screaming, no tears, just a slammed door and the faint sound of her car pulling away. I didn't follow. Instead, I walked upstairs and sat on Cale's bed, watching him sleep. He stirred slightly and reached for my hand in his sleep. And that was the moment I realized I'd already won. Not because I humiliated her, not because I caught her, but because I protected this, the one thing that still mattered. And everything else, it would come piece by piece. Delana didn't return the next morning. She didn't text. She didn't call. Not a single trace of her existed in the house anymore, except for the red dress still slumped on the bathroom chair and the faint perfume clinging to the hallway like residue from a weapon that had already detonated. Cale woke up asking where she was. She had an early meeting, I said, brushing his hair gently. She'll call you later. He nodded, still half asleep, unaware that the glass wall around our life had finally cracked. By 8:00 a.m., I was on the phone with Arden. She checked into the St. Regis under a different last name, she said. Looks like she booked it 3 nights ago. She knew the gala could go wrong, which means she's calculating her next move. We don't relax. I'm not, I said, watching Cale in the reflection of the glass as he spooned cereal into his mouth, humming to himself. Arden added, Your attorney filed the initial custody paperwork this morning. We'll submit the first packet of digital evidence by tomorrow. But Jackson, she's going to come out swinging. I'm counting on it. Because now, her overconfidence would be her leash, and I would let her run just far enough to hang herself with it. Later that day, I met with my lawyer, Evan Ross. A calm, clinical man with a background in forensic family law, Evan operated like a surgeon, precise, patient, and ruthless when necessary. She'll likely file for full custody the moment she receives this, he said, flipping through the draft of our complaint. She's delusional, I said. She's desperate, he corrected, which is more dangerous. We laid out the initial filings, text message logs, audio transcripts, timestamps. Not everything, not yet. Just enough to create doubt in her credibility, enough to freeze her momentum. The judges in this district lean conservative when it comes to parental stability, Evan said. A documented attempt to harm a spouse, even if subtle, can severely affect her claim. She thinks image will protect her. Evan shook his head. Image doesn't survive cross-examination. We scheduled a court appearance for 2 weeks out. Enough time to build context. Enough time for Delana to make more mistakes. Because when someone like her feels cornered, she doesn't retreat. She escalates. That night, I received the first email. Subject, Rethink This, Jackson. No name. No signature. Just a message typed in clean Arial font. You're choosing public humiliation over resolution. You think silence protects you, but it makes you look guilty too. People will ask why you stayed, what you ignored, what you enabled. If you go forward, you go alone. It wasn't threatening. It was warning. And it wasn't Delana's voice, it was Riven's. He was trying to bait me into backing off, trying to make me fear the optics. But they didn't understand. I wasn't afraid of perception anymore. I was done being a character in their performance. 3 days passed without a word from Delana. Then came the court filing. Emergency petition for temporary custody, citing emotional instability, marital neglect, and psychological distress inflicted upon the child by the father. It was absurd, and precisely what we predicted. Evan smirked as he handed me the PDF. Classic misdirection. She's counting on you responding with outrage, not strategy. She doesn't know me anymore, I said. She never did, he replied. We filed our response with an attached affidavit, signed by Arden, time-stamped recordings, 2 notarized statements from Cale's school counselor and pediatrician attesting to his emotional stability while in my care. We didn't throw everything, just the first punch.
The next time I saw Delana was in a courtroom. She wore white, not cream, not beige, white, as if she was the one starting over, as if the purity of her dress could wipe away the venom in her actions. She didn't look at me when she walked in. She sat beside her attorney, a sharp-featured man with aggressive posture and a habit of tapping his pen 3 times before speaking. When the judge entered, we all stood, and for the next hour, Delana pretended to be a mother concerned about her child's well-being under the care of a cold, emotionally withdrawn man. She cried. She trembled. She told the court I'd become paranoid, that I was isolating Cale, that I monitored her phone, that I'd installed devices to track her behavior. She framed it as control. She never mentioned the juice, or the texts, or the affair, because even she knew that would shatter her mask too soon. When it was our turn, Evan stood. We asked the court to consider the following: brief excerpts of conversation recorded from the marital residence, where Ms. Reiner is heard discussing strategic custody, financial gain, and emotional manipulation of the minor child. He played a 45-second clip. It wasn't dramatic, just calm, cold. Delana's voice. I'll let him take the lead for a while. Let him feel like he's winning. Then I'll shift the narrative. Courts love when the mother appears patient. It gives me leverage. Silence in the courtroom. Her attorney objected, citing privacy. Evan responded, "This was recorded legally in a shared marital property, admissible under this jurisdiction." The judge nodded. Noted. Objection overruled. Delana's face didn't flinch, but her grip on the table tightened. She had been cornered, not in public, not at the gala, but here, where it mattered. When court adjourned for the day, I walked past her in the hallway. She didn't look at me, but she whispered, low and venomous, "You're not the only one who knows how to dig." I paused, looked at her. Digging only matters when you're standing on solid ground. Back at home, I found Cale sitting by the window, sketching in his notebook. "What are you drawing?" I asked. He turned the page to show me, a tree house, multi-level, with rope ladders and windows on every side. "For us," he said, "so you can see everything around." Smart kid. That night, I held him a little longer before bed, because I knew the next phase wouldn't be just legal. It would be personal. 2 days later, the first blog post appeared. Anonymous. Thinly veiled. When control wears a smile, inside a quiet marriage war. It painted me as manipulative, emotionally distant, controlling. Claimed I was using tech surveillance against a grieving wife, that I weaponized silence. Comments flooded in, some skeptical, many empathetic. Delana had found her battleground. Public sympathy. I didn't respond, but we prepared a quiet release, one recorded interview, pre-cleared with legal, no slander, no attacks, just facts. We scheduled it for release on a niche podcast hosted by a respected former judge who specialized in psychological manipulation and family systems. Arden prepped me for the recording. Speak slowly. Don't rush to defend yourself. Let the story unfold. Trust the truth. When the host asked me why I stayed so long in a marriage that had clearly gone toxic, I paused and said, "Because I believed love could survive anything, until I learned that deception thrives in silence, and I wasn't willing to let my son inherit that kind of silence." The episode aired 48 hours later. By day's end, it had 110,000 plays. Delana called that night. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. "You think this is over?"
You think sympathy will shield you. I made you. I built the version of you that everyone loves. You'll collapse without me. That was the last message she ever left me directly. The judge's temporary ruling came in the following week. Full temporary custody to the father, supervised visitation rights to the mother, pending psychological evaluation and forensic review of submitted evidence. It wasn't final, but it was the clearest signal yet. The court saw through her. She didn't show up for the next hearing. Her attorney resigned 3 days later. By then, she'd checked out of the St. Regis and disappeared into a private rental in Hudson. Not because she'd given up, but because she knew the walls were closing in. And now, she'd rather vanish than be watched. There are silences that soothe. Silences that hold peace, like sitting beside someone you trust while the world spins quietly around you. And then, there are silences like this one, sharp, deliberate, designed to wound. After the temporary custody ruling, Delana vanished from the spotlight. She didn't show for her next supervised visitation. Her lawyer withdrew representation, citing irreconcilable directives. Even Riven, for all his smug arrogance, had gone quiet. No posts, no anonymous interviews, no shadow blog entries. But her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. And I knew her too well not to see it. Cale had begun asking fewer questions. He still looked toward the door every evening, hopeful maybe, but his routines had stabilized. He wasn't waking up in the middle of the night anymore. No more dreams that ended in tears. I cooked dinner every evening. I walked him to school. I sat with him while he did homework, and sometimes he'd just glance up at me with those wide, curious eyes and ask, "Why do people leave when you need them the most?" I didn't know how to answer that without crushing him, so I just said, "Sometimes they don't know how to stay." My legal team stayed busy. Evan pushed the motion to finalize custody. Arden kept tabs on Delana's activity, or lack thereof. Her accounts were dormant, her corporate affiliations quiet. She hadn't stepped foot into the gallery in almost 2 weeks. "She's planning something," Arden said. "She's not the type to disappear without setting traps." "Then we wait," I said. But waiting didn't mean we sat still. We kept building the case, cleaning the edges, validating all remaining footage, pulling financial trails from burner transactions and Venmo logs tied to anonymous accounts. Delana had used Riven as a proxy for more than just emotional support. She funneled money through his LLC, disguised petty expenses as professional consulting. It was clumsy, it was arrogant, and it was traceable. The next twist came through a late-night email. Not from her, from a name I didn't recognize. M.T. Harlow. Subject: "I have something you'll want to see." The message was brief. "You don't know me, but I've worked with your wife." We met during her last charity project in Hudson. She said some things I think you should hear. I've attached a voice file. Listen before you respond. The attachment was real, not spam. I ran it through Arden's verification process before playing it. Delana's voice came through clear, clipped, almost bored. He's smarter than I gave him credit for, but he's weak where it counts, emotionally. He won't risk public confrontation. He'll do this behind closed doors. That's where I win. That's where I bleed him out slow. She laughed. Riven says he doesn't understand why Jackson isn't angrier. I told him, Jackson's not a man who explodes. He implodes. It'll catch up eventually. She paused. I'm not afraid of losing custody. It's all reversible. Courts don't punish mothers for long, not when they look like me. Then silence. It wasn't rage that hit me after hearing that. It was something colder, sharper. She didn't just betray me. She underestimated the one thing she'd never truly understood, my endurance. I sent the clip to Evan. He responded 2 hours later. This just locked the final nail. We filed the tape under Evidentiary Exhibit 4.3. It wasn't just a smoking gun, it was character confirmation. It showed premeditation, manipulation, and intent to deceive the court system. 1 week later, I received an invitation. A handwritten card delivered to my office. Thick cardstock, expensive ink, clean cursive, from Delana. I think it's time we spoke without attorneys in the room. Come alone. You know the place. No address. Just that. I stared at it for a full minute, and I knew. She wanted a setting she controlled, a place where she still believed she had leverage. There was only one place she could mean, the old Westbury loft. A private exhibition space she'd kept before the gallery. It was vacant for years, too many memories. She only used it for closed installs and secret meetings. That was her stage, so I accepted. The next day, just after 6 p.m., I pulled up outside the building. No cameras, no witnesses, just clean walls, an old glass entry, and a staircase that creaked with memory. The loft hadn't changed. Exposed brick, industrial lighting, a single white couch facing a blank wall. And there she was, draped in black, wine glass in hand, legs crossed like she was welcoming an old lover home. "You came," she said. "Wasn't hard to find. I didn't want to do this through lawyers. You started through lawyers." She smiled. "And you started through silence." We stood across from each other, years of shared life between us, and nothing left unbroken. "What do you want, Delana?" "I want to make you an offer." I raised an eyebrow. "Let's skip the war," she said. "I walk away. I drop my claims. You keep primary custody. In return, you stop dragging my name through the courts. You don't pursue financial damages."
We each disappear. I stepped closer. "Why now?" "Because I know you. I know how relentless you are, and I'm tired. I'm not built to play defense." I laughed once, soft, disbelieving. "You're not built to lose." She didn't deny it. "I don't need to win anymore," she said. "I just want out with what's left of my dignity." I considered her for a long moment. Then I said, "There's nothing left to take from you, Delana. That's the real problem. You burned the forest and now you want to collect the ashes." She set down the wine glass. "You're not going to forgive me, are you?" "No." She looked down. "Then I guess we're done." I nodded. "We were done the day you handed me that juice and smirked." I left without another word, but I didn't leave empty-handed. I had recorded the conversation, legally, in a private meeting, without coercion, in a space she invited me to. It confirmed two things: her acknowledgement of guilt, her motivation to withdraw from the legal war without further exposure. Evan reviewed the audio. "This gives us every justification to file for uncontested sole custody," he said. "If she withdraws publicly, we secure a clean outcome. She'll never admit this in front of a judge. She doesn't have to. She's trying to disappear. We give her the out." And so we did. 2 weeks later, Delana officially withdrew her claim for custody. She submitted a signed statement admitting emotional burnout and citing inability to provide a stable environment for a minor at this time. The language was sanitized, deceitfully neutral, but the effect was permanent. I was granted full legal and physical custody of Cale. Riven disappeared from the scene. Rumors swirled that he'd taken a teaching gig in Spain. Others said he'd moved to Palm Springs. I didn't care. They both vanished from relevance, and for the first time in years, my life began to feel mine again. But victories in silence feel different than the ones you imagine. There were no applause, no big final scene, just paperwork and peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come with fireworks, but with stillness, with Cale asleep on the couch after a movie night, with the sound of the dishwasher humming.
with knowing the storm passed, and I was still standing. People think endings come with clarity. That after a battle, especially one as intimate and devastating as this, there's a moment when the clouds lift, the dust settles, and everything makes sense. But the truth is, endings leave a trail of paper, of emotion, of broken habits and half-empty rooms. Delana didn't return to collect her things. No farewell visit, no calls, no emails. Just a series of automated transfer notices from her trust fund and one final envelope from her attorney, which arrived by courier and contained nothing more than a signed notarization, surrendering all claims to shared property and joint custody. It didn't say goodbye. It said, "I'm done pretending I care about this." And that, strangely, made it easier to breathe. I spent the next 2 days walking through our penthouse with a black notebook in hand, listing every item that no longer belonged. The art she insisted on hanging, the expensive cookware she never used, the half-finished vision board in her office closet that still had a picture of us clipped beside a Tahiti travel brochure. Some things I couldn't throw away. Not yet. Others I did with satisfaction, like the custom-designed decanter set she gifted me 2 years ago on our anniversary. The one I later learned was a re-gift from a client she'd been sleeping with. The sharpest memories didn't live in objects. They lived in silence. The one after the gala, when she watched me without blinking. The one between her smirk and that glass of juice. The one in the loft when she said, "I just want out with what's left of my dignity." But even silence leaves footprints, and I was done chasing echoes. Kale adjusted faster than I expected. Kids don't carry timelines like adults. They carry patterns. And what he needed wasn't an apology from his mother or an explanation he couldn't process. He needed presence. I made breakfast every morning. Eggs, toast, and sometimes waffles with strawberries when he asked. I started walking him all the way into school instead of dropping him off at the corner. The other parents began to recognize me, not as Delana's husband, but as Kale's dad. That distinction felt better than any title I'd ever earned. One afternoon, his teacher pulled me aside. "Kale's been drawing a lot more lately," she said. "Detailed work. He says he wants to design buildings like you." I nodded. He's always been observant. "He talks about you with clarity," she added. "He says, 'My dad knows how to fix things without yelling.'" I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said thank you. Evan scheduled the final hearing to formalize custody. This time, it was procedural. No arguments, no accusations, just signatures. But Delana showed up. Not in white this time, not with flair. She wore a plain gray blazer and carried a small black leather handbag. No entourage, no legal counsel. When the judge asked if she had anything to add before the ruling, she stood up and said, "I waive all rights and further involvement. I trust the court's judgment." It wasn't an admission of guilt. It was surrender. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't cry. She didn't glance at me. But something was different in her posture, like someone who finally realized the mirror no longer reflected who they pretended to be. The ruling was stamped 15 minutes later. Full legal and physical custody of Kale was awarded to me, permanently. As we exited the courtroom, I looked back once. She didn't. Back home, Arden and I sat on the balcony, sipping coffee. It was early evening. Kale was inside watching a documentary about marine architecture. "You're quiet," she said. "I didn't think this part would feel so neutral." "You expected relief?" "No. I expected a final breath, a release. But all I feel is stillness." "That's not nothing, Jax," she said. "Stillness means you're no longer bleeding." She leaned back, her gaze on the skyline. "I still think you should do the interview." I looked over. "You really believe the story matters to anyone but us?" It's not about revenge anymore. It's about truth, about dignity, about showing people that staying silent isn't noble if it means you're erasing yourself. I let the thought sit there. Maybe it wasn't just about reclaiming the past. Maybe it was about reframing the present. The podcast episode aired 1 week later. I didn't name her. I didn't need to. I told the story plainly. From the first signs of the cracks, to the gala, to the juice, to the aftermath. The host guided me through the emotion, not just the facts, but the feelings. "Did you ever stop loving her?" he asked. I took a long pause before answering. "No," I said. "Not until she weaponized my trust. Not until she tried to rewrite the story while I was still living it." The episode went viral, not because it was explosive, but because it was honest. Thousands of comments poured in, people who had stayed too long, who had forgiven too much, who had questioned themselves into numbness. For the first time, I realized my silence hadn't protected Kale. It had isolated us, and breaking that silence was the beginning of healing. 2 months later, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address. But I knew the handwriting. It was Delena's. "Jackson, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve that. But I want you to know, I listened to your interview. I heard things I never allowed myself to hear when we were together. You didn't explode, like I said you would. You stayed calm. You didn't humiliate me publicly. You told the truth. I'm not proud of who I became. I let resentment fester. I let success rewrite my empathy. I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as an obstacle. That was my failure. I won't ask to see Kale, not now. Maybe one day, when I've done the work, when I've earned it. Tell him I love him." Delena, I read it twice, and then I placed it in a folder marked Unsent Answers. Because forgiveness wasn't about inviting her back. It was about not letting her take another step inside my head. Spring turned to early summer. Kale started soccer. I took a step back from work, let my team run the firm for a while I learned how to build Lego castles again. We traveled for the first time, just the two of us, Chicago, then the Grand Canyon, then a quiet beach in Oregon where he found a smooth black stone he called Dad Rock and insisted we take home. Arden stopped by often. She never pushed, never asked what was next. She just showed up with takeout or movie night snacks, and sometimes, after Kale fell asleep, we'd sit outside and just breathe. One night I asked her, "Do you ever wonder if we become better versions of ourselves after the damage, or because of it?" She smiled. "Both. We break. Then we decide what's worth rebuilding." I looked at her. "I'm rebuilding now," I said. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're doing it well." In the end, Delena didn't disappear because she was afraid. She disappeared because there was nothing left for her to control. She left behind a name that once commanded admiration, but now rang hollow in every professional circle she once curated. She left behind a gallery now under new management, renamed and redirected toward local artists who had once been excluded for being too raw. She left behind a son who no longer waited at the door for her, and she left behind a man who had once centered his world around her approval, but now centered it around his son, his peace, and his quiet strength. What she left behind wasn't just ruin, it was freedom, for me, and for Kale. Victory rarely looks how we imagine it. There's no cinematic swell, no standing ovation, no dramatic monologue shouted across a courtroom or whispered into a phone. Real victory, the kind you earn after being torn down and rebuilt, is quieter, subtle, almost gentle. It looks like Saturday mornings with your son curled under your arm, snoring softly as the sunlight creeps in. It sounds like the absence of fear when you hear your phone buzz. It feels like peace settling into the corners of your life, the same corners where chaos used to live. That's where I found myself, Months after the storm passed. Not euphoric, not triumphant, just still, and whole. The last time I drove past the gallery, it had a different name, new signage, fresh colors, a rotating showcase of young artists and community exhibits. Delena's signature gold-lettered branding was gone, scrubbed clean. I didn't stop. There was nothing left to see there. Not revenge, not regret. Just space where a different story now lived. Cale flourished in ways I hadn't expected. He asked harder questions. He held deeper conversations. At night, he'd lie on the couch next to me, flipping through books he picked himself. One evening, he asked, "Dad, do you think people change because they want to or because they have to?" I paused, setting down the legal memo I was reviewing. "I think most people wait until they have to," I said, "but the brave ones change before it's too late." He nodded slowly. "Like how you got stronger after Mom left?" My throat tightened. "Yeah," I said. "Something like that." One Sunday, Arden and I took Cale to the sculpture garden near the river. He ran ahead, hopping between shadowed stepping stones. Arden watched him, then looked at me. "You ever think about what your life would have looked like if you hadn't switched the drinks that night?" I exhaled. "Every so often. But it's not the poison I think about, it's the smirk. That smirk saved your life." "I know." She reached down and picked up a smooth stone, then offered it to me. "Keep this one," she said. "For the moment you decided not to play dumb." I laughed. I never played dumb. I just wanted to believe she'd stop hurting me before it went too far. "You gave her every chance to do the right thing. And she chose silence. Which made space for yours to matter." Delena never tried to come back. No letters beyond the first. No sudden attempts to reclaim her public image. From what little I heard, she left the city. Some said she moved to a coastal town in the Carolinas. Others claimed she was seeing a therapist, living off residuals and quietly managing a boutique shop under a different name. I didn't chase the details. I let them drift. Some stories don't need an epilogue. I renovated the condo, not because I wanted to erase her, but because I needed to reclaim it. I repainted every wall, replaced the furniture she'd chosen, tore down the marble accent wall she insisted made the place feel powerful. It never felt powerful. It felt like a showroom for a life that wasn't real. Now it felt like home. I framed one of Cale's sketches and hung it by the front door. A jagged skyline with uneven shadows. He titled it, "Safe Now." Every time I left for work or came home, I saw it. And I remembered, safety isn't a place. It's the promise you keep showing up. The podcast interview had long since stopped trending, but it brought a few messages my way. From strangers, from friends who never knew what I was going through. One in particular stayed with me. "Your story didn't make me angry. It made me brave. I've been living with the same kind of silence. But now, I'm done pretending too." It reminded me why I told it in the first place. Not for vindication, but so the next person wouldn't have to spend years asking, was it just me? I had dinner with my parents the night before Cale's birthday. My father pulled me aside on the balcony afterward. "I didn't know you had that kind of strength in you," he said. "I didn't either," I admitted. He looked down at his glass. "Sometimes I think our generation taught you to endure pain, not to name it. That might have been our mistake." I didn't argue. I just clapped his shoulder. "You did what you knew," I said. "Now I get to do better." He nodded. And in that moment, we weren't just father and son. We were men learning in opposite directions. On Cale's birthday, he opened his gifts one by one, then looked at me and said, "You're my favorite present." I held back tears, smiling like I had it all together. But inside, I broke. Not from pain, from gratitude.
for the chance to still be here, to raise him in truth, to love him without fear. Victory wasn't loud. It didn't wear a crown or demand attention. It looked like a boy with frosting on his cheek, a home with mismatched furniture and peace in every corner, a man who didn't lose himself trying to hold on to someone who was already gone. I didn't win because she lost. I won because I stopped believing I needed her to prove my worth, because I showed up every single day and stayed. That's the quiet kind of victory they never teach you to chase. But once you find it, you never let it go. Some betrayals don't shatter you all at once. They chip away slowly, disguised as compromise, silence, or duty. And sometimes, the hardest truth isn't that someone hurt you, but that you stayed long after the damage was done, hoping love could still be enough. But healing doesn't begin with justice. It begins with clarity. It begins the moment you stop begging for the bare minimum and start building something better for yourself, even if that something looks small, quiet, or unfamiliar. This story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation, about refusing to let your identity be defined by who left, who lied, or who didn't choose you. In the end, strength is often quiet. It's the steady hand of someone who chooses peace over spectacle, who rebuilds not to prove a point, but to find a home inside their own skin again. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of something you've survived, thank you for being here. Your presence matters. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, share where you're watching from, and if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Until next time, take care of your peace. It's yours to protect,